Hey, well, good morning to you. How you doing? It's Sunday morning, the 8th of December, 2019. Are you well? Hey, listen, I hope you didn't pay $24.95 to watch that dreadful boxing match on Sky last night. I hope you didn't pay for it. I watched it. Not going to say whether I paid for it or not. What a load of nonsense that was. Are you in good form this Sunday morning? It is Sunday View with me, Richie Allen, live right now on multiple platforms, of course. It's exactly 11 o'clock. I said already it's December 8th. Looking through the papers this morning and listening into one or two of the UK's mid-morning talk shows as well. That's how Sunday View normally goes, and that's how it'll go today. Nice to be with you as always. Let's do it then. Tweet the programme right now if you feel like it. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. Alrighty.
Richie Allen.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Yeah, bread and circuses, I hear you say. You're right too. It seems like bread and circuses, it seems like the sport in the last few years, it seems to kind of grow exponentially, doesn't it? The coverage of sporting events that you must watch, sports that you simply must watch, and then get bombarded while you're watching them with all sorts of subliminal mind control and gambling ads and all the rest of it, yeah. Anyway, enough of that old tinfoil hat stuff. I've had a good weekend myself. I'm in good form this morning. It's nice. It's bright in Salford and Greater Manchester. It's lovely. And it's, it's dry. It was a bit wet yesterday. A lot of rain yesterday, but dry today. And I'm in good spirits, as I said. So without further ado, let's look at the front pages of this morning's papers. The Observer. The headline is, Coals Grow to Stop Johnson with Tactical Voting as Race Tightens. Is the race tightening? This is an 11th hour appeal, according to The Observer, for those who don't like the Conservatives very much to vote tactically on Thursday. The paper reports calls from senior Labour, Lib Dem and Scottish National Party figures for voters to ditch their allegiances in order to deprive Boris Johnson of a majority. In fact, there has been, over the weekend, 5 separate polls published, and we'll talk about those briefly in a few minutes' time. And the polls do show a little bit of a narrowing of the gap that was enjoyed previously by Boris Johnson. So we'll talk about that maybe briefly in a few minutes. The Sunday Express headline is, Boris, Brexit is now up to you. This is a call from Boris Johnson in the Sunday Express. He says Brexit is now up to you. The paper says Johnson is warning the election will be close despite the opinion polls saying otherwise. The Sunday Telegraph leads with, Tories unveil strict limits on unskilled migrants. Do they? We'll talk about that for sure in a couple of minutes' time. Migrants on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, the story that there will be strict limits. The Mail on Sunday headline is, Save us from a Friday the 13th horror. The Mail, of course, which is the Conservative Party newspaper, is warning that we need to be saved from Friday the 13th. Obviously, Thursday, the 12th, this coming Thursday, is the day that the country goes to the polls. The Mail is saying, let's not wake up on Friday to a Corbyn-Nicola Sturgeon alliance. Now, the Mail on Sunday also goes with a story about the Simon Wiesenthal Centre, which is a Jewish human rights organisation, and I've interviewed people from that organisation in my past. The Simon Wiesenthal Centre is questioning Jeremy Corbyn's suitability even to be the Prime Minister. Well, because apparently he's a bit of a racist, according to the Simon Wiesenthal Centre. These organisations like the Simon Wiesenthal Centre, like Hope Not Hate, like Kick It Out, all of these anti-racism organisations, they can't exist without finding racism everywhere. It's a bit of a paradox, that, isn't it? You've got to think really hard about that one. They're bound to find racism and bigotry everywhere, because if they didn't, well, they wouldn't exist, would they? Right? Racism is everywhere. So the Simon Wiesenthal Centre featured in the Mail on Sunday. The Sunday Times goes with, exposed the secret Labour files of shame. This is the anti-Semitism thing that, well, not to put too fine a point on it, is as boring as a dog's arse. Tired we are of hearing about anti-Semitism from lunatics on the far right of UK politics, from unashamed diehard Zionists in the UK, and like I said before, some of these groups like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which must see anti-Semitism everywhere. Right? So it just hasn't gone away. It's been around now for a couple of years, and it's ramped up, of course, during this election cycle, this notion that anti-Jewish racism, which is an oxymoron, can't be an anti-Jewish racist. Jews, God love them. If there is a God, I'm sure he does love them. Jews are not a race. I know, you've heard that one before, I know. It's your greatest hits, Richie. You should bring out a CD. I should do, and maybe I will, because it might get into some thick skulls. Jews are not a race. They're an identity group. Just like Christians. Just like Muslims. Not a race. White people mostly. And you can't be an anti-Jewish racist. You can be anti-Jewish, of course. You can have a bigoted approach to the religion if you desire to have such a bigoted approach. But it's not racism at all. Labour said there is no place for anti-Semitism in the party. Again, and we're tackling it again. We will come back to it briefly a bit later. The Sunday Mirror laughably goes with the headline, Jungle Cliff jailed for bank robbery. That's apparently about a television show called I'm a Celebrity. And somebody in it is called Cliff Parisi. I never heard of him. Then again, he's never heard of me. Probably. Cliff Parisi. And apparently at one time he was jailed for bank robbery. Lovely. Sunday People, crack dealer teacher, I want to go back to work. Self-explanatory. A teacher with a conviction for dealing crack wants to go back to the classroom. Fair enough. And the Star on Sunday headline is Holly Jungle Snub. And that story is about Holly Willoughby, who presents mid-morning television here in the UK. That's the story that is of no interest to you and has no relevance to anything we're going to be talking about today. That's the tabloids for you then. At 8 minutes past 11, Sunday morning, the 8th of December 2019. Back to the migration claims then. Boris Johnson was interviewed by Sky News' Sophie Ridge yesterday for her programme This Morning. And I'm not going to subject you to much of it, just one snippet. What about this immigration system he wants to bring in? This points even based system mooted by Johnson that is the focus of a lot of the newspapers this morning. What about it then, Boris? Here he is with Sophie Ridge on Sky News earlier on.
What we want to do is to use an Australian-style points-based system. I'm not hostile to immigration, as you know, Sophie. I'm a believer in allowing people to come to this country. I think, if they have talents and they want to do things in make their lives in the UK and they can contribute to our country, fantastic. And we've benefited from that. But what we're going to do is have three categories, as you may have seen from what we're saying. So people who are exceptional talents, they can come in, first violinists, nuclear physicists, prima ballerinas, whatever. They're going to come in, start-up kings and queens. They're going to come in simply by virtue of what they can contribute. Then there will be skilled workers, and we'll have a system so that people can come in to work in the NHS or whatever.
My question is,
and then
if
there
you
will be
want to
another
see...
sector, which is for a sector-specific group who won't have an automatic right to stay, but will come to do particular jobs and stay for a while.
Yeah. A short time later, Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage, very strange situation, isn't it, Farage? He's the Brexit Party leader, but he himself isn't standing in any constituency. You might remember that. You might know that. He was also with Sophie Ridge on her programme, and he said that Johnson's plan sounded very, very familiar to him.
I've been saying this for years, that we should not be discriminating against people coming from other parts of the world in favour of the European Union, and you do it on a skills base. You also differentiate between settlement and work permits. And yes, you're right, they're beginning to say the same things. The problem is they'll make no real commitment to cut the numbers coming in. And this is the fourth Conservative manifesto in a row promising to reduce numbers.
I mean, he guaranteed that numbers would come down when I sat down with him.
I don't
believe
so.
him?
Come on, this is the same Boris Johnson who twice has publicly called for mass amnesties for illegal immigrants.
I mean, we can have a little look to something else that he told me about immigration in that interview. The Prime Minister saying, I'm a believer in allowing people to come into this country if they have talents and they want to do things and make their lives in the UK and they can contribute to our economy, fantastic, and we've benefited from that.
So how does he square that with calling for amnesties for hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants? Boris Johnson has always been very soft on the immigration issue, but you know what? There's an election on, so tell people what they want to hear.
Tell people what they want to hear, says Nigel Farage, the leader of the Brexit Party. David says, well, you can be born special, but if you choose it, everyone would do it, says David, presumably referring to the story in the Times about anti-Semitism. Joe Public tweets, Corbyn wants to halt arms sales to Israel, he says. Well, he does, and the Labour Party has promised, although it's gone very quiet on that promise, to recognise Palestine officially, to recognise the existence of the state of Palestine pre-June 1967 borders and all the rest of it. Good morning to David Kona, by the way. He was at the Etihad yesterday for the Manchester Derby. How you doing, David? And he's tweeted me about that. We might talk about it later on, just very briefly. I've never self-censored, but I've had my say on these issues over the years about victimhood. I wouldn't allow anybody make me a victim, you know. Oh, it's easy for you to say, Richie. I get this all the time. As a white guy, it's easy for you to say that. It's not so easy for me to say it. I had a pretty tough time of it growing up. A very tough time of it. And you might say, well, your tough time, Richie, it didn't have anything to do, it had no correlation with your ethnicity. It didn't, no. I would agree. But I had a very difficult time of it. But I resolved in my teens that I wouldn't be a victim of anybody. I wouldn't be anybody's victim. I wouldn't become a victim of the things that happened to me. You know, I would be nobody's victim. I wouldn't allow anybody take ownership of me and ownership of the responsibility for me to grow, that I would do it myself. You see, and I might come back to that a bit later on, because there was an incident of clear racism yesterday in the Manchester Derby when a proper Egypt made monkey gestures to a Manchester United footballer. A proper muppet in every sense of the word. But it's the response to stuff like that I find increasingly not only interesting, but I think it's increasingly important that we analyse it and we look to see who's trying to make capital out of these things now, and what is going to be the ultimate resolution offered by those who make, you know, capital. Well, we might come back to it briefly, because I think there's something new in it, I think, that we can have a look at. So, Boris Johnson, you heard him there, Farage. Now, John Ashworth. We'll stay with immigration for a minute, because it is important, as it is the focus today. Labour's John Ashworth is the Shadow Health Secretary. What does he think of Boris Johnson's points-based immigration system proposal?
Well, we should have a fair immigration system, a fair and balanced immigration system. Of course we should. But he's imposing a tax on nurses coming from the EU and beyond to come and work here in our NHS to care for our sick and our elderly. He's going to exacerbate the staffing crisis in our NHS with his proposals. And he's also misleading the British people, because he's trying to give them the impression that he's going to bring immigration down. But when you look at the details of what he's announced today, he's saying he's going to hand over decisions on who will get a visa to an independent committee. He said the committee will be independent in the same way the Bank of England is independent. So he's actually misleading people when he says he's bringing immigration down. There'll be no democratic control. There'll be no accountability over any decision that any immigration minister makes, because it'll be handed over to a statutory independent committee. So again, Boris Johnson's lying to the British people.
A strong word there, lying.
Well, it is a strong word, but it is. I mean, you caught him out on the fact that he's not delivering 50,000 extra nurses, didn't you? He had to admit, because you put him under pressure, that it's only 31,000 new nurses. So again, that was a lie.
That was a lie. Now, we don't need to hear that clip, the one John Ashworth referred to, because Ridge did get Boris Johnson to admit that it wouldn't be 50,000 new nurses. But we knew that anyway, didn't we? We knew Johnson was telling lies because his lips were moving. Obviously, it's not 50,000 new nurses. So I don't need to play you that clip. Ridge basically gets Johnson to say, no, it'll be 31,000 new nurses. Anyway, so what about Labour then? Back to John Ashworth. Immigration, John, up or down if you lead the next government? Up or down, son?
You want an immigration system which reflects your needs in the economy. So, for example, if a hospital thinks that a nurse or a surgeon is qualified to come here to care for our sick, to carry out operations on people who need operations, and my God, people need operations with the waiting lists at 4.5 million under the Tories, worst waiting lists ever at the moment under the Tories, then that hospital should be allowed to, those people should be allowed to come here. So you have an immigration system that reflects the needs of your economy.
So if the economy needs it, would you be happy to see immigration levels go up under a Labour government? I mean, many people would say that was absolutely reasonable position.
If the economy needs it, then of course people should come here to work in our economy, whether it's the National Health Service,
so you'd be happy to see levels go up?
Whether it's the National Health Service, whether...
Listen to what Ridge is doing there. You probably won't notice this because it might not occur to you that Sophie Ridge used to work for the Sun newspaper. She worked for the Sun for a number of years, taking part in sting operations against well-known people. Now, I know it's Comcast now, I know Sky Comcast now, but ultimately Sky is a Rupert Murdoch. It's one of the bastard children of Rupert Murdoch, right? It's a right-wing organisation. It's Conservative Party supporting. And you got to understand that. What Sophie Ridge, the presenter, is doing there is she's working on behalf of Murdoch's tabloid newspapers to generate a headline. It's all very clever, actually. A lot of people wouldn't notice this, but Ashworth basically said, and it isn't unreasonable. Now, I've no time for Labour or for the Tories, you know that. What Ashworth said isn't unreasonable. If we have jobs in the NHS to fill, we can't fill them here. It would be common sense to advertise those jobs and get those people in from overseas, from Europe or from overseas. But what she does is very interesting.
National Health Service,
so
where
you'd be happy to see levels go up.
So you're quite happy to see levels go up. But this is the binary choice. This is the binary choice tactic that I've been talking about quite a lot lately on the radio show. It's rubbish, and it has no journalistic value whatsoever. It's reducing complicated and complex conversations down to simple absolutes, yes or no's. And what Ridge is trying to do there is he's trying to generate a headline where it can be claimed later on that Jonathan Ashworth said, yeah, I'd be happy for immigration to go up, when he's not quite saying that.
You're happy to see levels go up.
Whether it's the National Health Service, where there are desperate shortages after 10 years of mismanagement by the Tories, or other parts of our economy that need people. Our care sector, we're going to talk about social care today. Our social care sector runs on immigrant labour. And if the Tories are cutting off that immigrant labour from our social care sector, then our social care sector would collapse.
Dreadful stuff, isn't it? If I'd have carried on like that when I was working in commercial radio, I'd have been pulled up by my bootstraps, by my bosses. They would have said, that's a bit shabby, that, trying to put words into Ashworth's mouth to get him to say, I'm happy for immigration to go up, when in fact he's saying specifically, if there's a shortage in the NHS, that is when we would need to let immigrants in. Now, I'm not supporting John Ashworth. Labour is in favour of freedom of movement, which is not a good thing, I don't believe. But it's terrible journalism. It's dreadful presenting, and it has become the norm, the binary choice. And sadly, you see it everywhere now. You see it amongst people, I don't know, sitting around having a drink. You see it amongst people having a chat on the streets. You see it amongst people work colleagues, you see it amongst people talking on Twitter and on Facebook. Binary choice. And it's not good. 20 minutes past the hour. Also, what's not good is, and again, have a listen to this, the very tail end of it here. He talks about social care being almost totally reliant on immigrant workers. Have a listen.
So we're going to talk about social care today. Our social care sector runs on immigrant labour.
Why?
And if the Tories
Why
are
does
cutting
it?
off that immigrant labour.
Why?
Runs on immigrant labour.
Why does our social care sector run on immigrant labour? Do you know why? Because, well, without having done an enormous amount of research into it, it's because I think the conditions that a lot of people find themselves working in, the pay, right, isn't great. And I would be asking the question if I was Sophie Ridge to Jonathan Ashworth. Why aren't we treating the employment of social care workers? Why aren't we treating it with the utmost seriousness? Surely there isn't any more serious job or more responsible job than sending young men and women around to the houses of senior citizens who can't perform certain functions for themselves anymore. Surely that's a very, very, very serious responsibility. And surely there is something wrong with asking, I don't know, with imposing, and this is going to sound very right wing now, and I couldn't be further from right wing than any person you've ever heard on any radio station ever. But surely it's not a great thing for infirm, for sick, sometimes for people with dementia and other problems, to be dealing with people coming in to look after them where maybe there's a bit of a cultural difference, maybe there's a language barrier. Surely it's not the best possible thing. Surely the best possible thing to do would be to train people born and bred here, regardless of the colour of their skin. Train them properly. Find good people. There is a massive shortage of carers in this country. I know a little bit about this because when we lived in Fallowfield, we were living next door for a period to a senior lady in her mid-90s called Dorothy. And she had a social carer, a care worker, come to see her from week to week. And I met the person. She was a lovely woman, a black woman as it happened, but a British woman. Surely it's with a lot of people looking for work, with younger people not having a lot of, I don't know, a lot of choices. Maybe leaving school 15, 16, 17, maybe not going on to third level. Show them the value of senior citizens. Educate them as to the importance of our elderly neighbours. Train them properly and pay them well. And then you wouldn't need to be relying on an immigrant workforce to take care of our senior citizens who've become an afterthought. Useless eaters now. Society is beginning to see them as. Train up British people, men and women. Pay them properly. Instill in them a sense of pride that going to the home of an elderly man or an elderly woman who worked all their lives, to help them out, to help them bathe maybe, to take them out for a couple of hours maybe, to help cook their meals, is a wonderful, wonderful vocation. And you could be paid well doing it. But Ridge doesn't ask him that. It's dreadful, 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 dreadful presenting. A guy says social care is almost totally reliant on an immigrant workforce. Why? Why is it? Why can't we get our children, our young men, our 20-somethings who don't have jobs or who are complaining because there's nothing for them? Why can't we train them up and give them those jobs? Anyway, that's the soapbox moment for today. But I really mean that. It really means a lot to me, that. 24 and a half minutes past the hour. So on social care, Jonathan Ashworth and the Labour Party has a big policy announcement today on caring for the elderly. Here he is.
Essentially, we're announcing free personal social care because, throughout this election campaign, you've seen heartbreaking stories of elderly people languishing on trolleys in hospital corridors, sometimes for hours upon hours. A 99-year-old war veteran down in Kent waiting for 10 hours in a hospital corridor on a trolley. I mean, it's really quite shameful. The fact that Boris Johnson can't get a grip of this is quite appalling, actually, when you think about it. And part of the reason why our NHS is under such intense pressure is, yes, 10 years of cutbacks across health services, but we've had these savage cuts to social care budgets. This is the support that elderly people get in the community to stay in their home. So we're going to put more support in. We're going to fund it properly, £10 billion extra, and we're going to introduce free personal care, because I don't want to have people languishing on trolleys in hospital corridors for hours and hours and hours.
What does that mean, free personal care? Does that mean no one will have to pay anything for their care?
It means that no one will have to pay anything for the care that they get in their home. There's support, getting out of bed, support with
no matter how wealthy they are.
Cleaning, yeah, but this is about ensuring fairness in the system.
It's expensive, though.
Well, we're putting £10 billion extra in. And, look, this issue on social care has been ducked by parties for years now, hasn't it? Boris Johnson said he had a big priority for it, or a big plan for it on the steps of Downing Street, and his plan's vanished, hasn't he? He hasn't got a plan. So we think it's time to put forward a serious, credible, costed plan for social care, which is why we're putting £10 billion extra into the system to provide everyone with free personal care.
Right. Now, Ridge did say to him, there's no point in me playing the clip, Ridge did say to him that £10 billion a year is a drop in the ocean, and that the Institute for Fiscal Studies said that money won't be enough. Make your own mind up. 26 and a half minutes past 11. I'm going to read a couple of comments and then we'll take a tune. Hi to Acker, who tweets, why do so many established social workers end up in control, like in the family court system, whereas all the caring jobs seem to be left to overseas immigrants or migrants? Yeah. Well, like I said, you see, traditionally, and John Stott might answer the question for you, because John tweets, I've worked in social care, and although there wasn't that much immigration labour where I worked, the pay was absolutely appalling. You were paid from the moment you entered a home until you left it. You could be out all day and earn absolutely nothing, says John. It's primarily down to the very low salaries paid to, as I said, to people doing what I've already said is an incredibly responsible job. And it's a question none of the UK journalists will ask any politician this morning. They will not ask them. They will not ask them. Deliberately, they will not ask them, why can't we take thousands of young men and women, school leavers, with no qualifications? Why can't we train them? Pay them while we train them, and then pay them properly and give them a pathway into care. Nobody will ask that question today. 27 and a half, nearly 28 minutes past the hour. Time for some music. Here's Morrissey. Yeah, a bit of Morrissey here. This is You're the One for Me, Fatty. On Sunday View with me, Richie Allen. Back with more of the papers and more clips in a couple of minutes' time.
Renowned healer Mark Byersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Byersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbyersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Yeah, Sunday View, it is the 8th of December 2019. It's exactly 20... It isn't. It's 18 minutes already, is it, to the top of the hour. Time is flying. Just a brief word on the polls. Not those polls, not the Polish, the polls. I mentioned earlier there was another raft of them over the weekend. 5 of them, YouGov, Ipso, I think, Comres as well, and others. The aggregate score is that Boris Johnson and the Tories have a 10-point lead and are projected to get 344 seats on Thursday. Now, it was 366 10 days ago, right? All right, so there is a narrowing of that lead of sorts. John Curtis is the expert here. He's the politics man, the top man at Strathclyde University. Here he is with Andrew Marr on those polls.
Well, we've had 5 polls come out over the weekend. On average, they put the Conservatives 10 points ahead. And in truth, that's where we were at the beginning of the election campaign. So although during the course of the election campaign there has been movement for both Conservative and Labour, both have gained ground, Conservatives at the expense of the Brexit Party, Labour at the expense of the Democrats, certainly the implication of this morning's polls is that basically not very much further movement has happened during the course of the last week, which does therefore mean that the Conservatives are certainly in pole position to win, but not necessarily so far ahead that they're guaranteed. We've had a couple of exercises done for pro-Remain organisations trying to come up with seat estimates using clever statistics. 344, 345 seats for the Conservatives, around a 40 majority.
A working majority. Now, what that misses, of course, at the moment, is saying tactical voting, because there are lots of places in the country where people are looking very, very seriously at how to defeat, particularly a Conservative candidate, in different ways. Now, we won't know what effect that's going to have until we actually get the results in, presumably.
Well, one of the things about tactical voting you have to understand is that people tend to decide to do it quite late in the day. And therefore, and also it's a relatively small number of people who do it, but they can have a big impact. So it's therefore very difficult to see in the polls in the run-up to an election what the extent to which it's going to take place. And that's bound to remain one of the uncertainties that will be hanging over Central Office during the course of the next 4 days.
Yeah. So basically they're saying that they can't really judge any of this tactical voting, or they can't predict it. So we'll have to wait for the result to see if it made any difference. Anti-Semitism then, I know you're tired of it. It's everywhere. This is Sunday View. Looking at the newspapers, it's everywhere this morning. So we have to cover it. I like to give you a different take on it, of course. Back to the front page of the Times newspaper. Let me just grab it here. The headline on the front page of the Times. I've got my tablet here. The best laid plans of mice and men. Also a very interesting story in the Sunday Times today about an Indian couple who were prevented from adopting a white child by a council here in the UK. They went to adopt a child in the United States, and then they sued their local authority for discriminating against them, and they won. It's a very interesting read in the Times, the Sunday Times that is. Problem is, of course, you've got to subscribe to read. I do subscribe, of course, as part of the Richie Allen radio show. So I've got the story. It's an interesting one. It really is. I don't think I'll have time to get into it this morning, but I might do on the radio show in the course of the week. Anyway, back to the front page of the Times. Exposed is the headline. The secret Labour files of shame. Leaked internal documents. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of Labour members. Hundreds of thousands, right? Got to keep that in mind anyway. The Times journalists Gabriel Pogrund, George Arbuthnot and Jonathan Calvert have written about new internal documents that says Labour has a shocking record in tackling new anti-Semitism cases. And they pull out one or two cases where they say very disturbing things have been said, with some Labour members likening Jewish people to killer viruses, labelling Jewish people as bent-nosed, manipulative liars, and also calling for the extermination of every Jew on the planet. Problem with that's not very nice, of course. These are not very nice things to say about anybody. The problem with the story in the Sunday Times is it's very short on detail. Like who are these people who have, emailed such things, or whom have said such things, or posted such things on Facebook? Who are they? What happened to them? One Labour member from Nottingham wrote that Jews represent a viral infection that needs to be completely eliminated, and said he wanted the complete extinction of all Jews. That's a Labour member, somebody who's a member of the Labour Party. But who is this guy? When did he join the Labour Party? Where did he say this? Why did he say it? I'm not saying that there's any good reason for saying that. There isn't, of course. And we have laws against that anyway. Incitement to violence is a crime in this country, and of course it should be. And of course, when you can prove that somebody has incited violence against somebody else, regardless of, who that person is, well, it should be investigated, of course. It took 10 months, says the Times today, to get rid of that guy after it was reported back in 2018. Apparently another veteran councillor at a Labour meeting shouted at somebody else that the other person was licking the bum of Jews for money. They say half of these 100 anti-Semitism cases between last summer and this May involved a warning or no action at all. But again, we'd have to see each and every one of the 100. We'd have to see them to get a real understanding of what was actually said, right? Right. Because remember, you've got this IHRC definition of anti-Semitism, which is a nonsense, which of course I don't agree with. Likening the behaviour of the Israeli government or the IDF to Nazis is outlawed in the anti-Semitism definition. But I would say when actions taken by the IDF are provably and easily comparable to the actions of the Nazis, well, if that's the comparison you want to make, by all means make that comparison. It doesn't demonstrate any hostility or any bigotry towards Jews. I've said it 1,000 times myself. The Israeli Defence Forces shoots children. It imprisons children in darkness in 24-hour. We've had various charity groups on this programme over the years who've said that children, Palestinian children, are routinely tortured by the Israeli Defence Forces. We've seen the right of return protests. We've seen people shot dead. We've seen people come to help being shot dead by the Israeli Defence Forces. All right. Right. You know my opinion on it anyway. Let's hear Darren Grimes. Darren Grimes is a little Geordie guy. He's a Conservative commentator and is used a lot now on BBC and the Sky. Young guy, Brexiteer, and he works for the Institute of Economic Affairs these days. Here's Grimes on Sky News this morning doing the paper review, talking about anti-Semitism in Labour.
So there have been leaked internal documents. This is following on from 70 officials who have come forward, past and present officials in the Labour Party, writing to... the Labour Party is the only party other than the BNP to be investigated over allegations of racism. And the fact that 70 officials, past and present, have wrote to say this is a party that is not dealing with anti-Semitism. You've got people here saying that Jews are bent-nosed, manipulative liars and calling for the extermination of every Jew on the planet.
Yeah, you don't have people saying that. You've got one person saying that out of hundreds of thousands of Labour members. Labour is the biggest party in Western Europe. It's seen a massive surge in membership numbers, applications to be members, and also appointed memberships since the advent of Jeremy Corbyn, since he won the leadership race. It is the biggest political party in Western Europe. It's got a massive membership. This is one guy who said this. It's not nice, but it's one guy.
And these people were either given written warnings or nothing happened whatsoever. How Jeremy Corbyn could have looked Andrew Neil in the eye the other week and said, this is a party that is dealing with anti-Semitism. We are getting to the root cause of this and dealing with it and stamping out this cancer from within our party. It is evidently not the case. And it is no wonder that you've got 40% of Jews polled saying that they will leave the country if Jeremy Corbyn is made Prime Minister.
Now, the presenter is wretched here. Her name is Gillian Joseph. She's a Sky News presenter, often presents with a guy called Stephen Dixon. She is horrendously poor here. She must challenge that. She must say to Grimes, Darren Grimes, where are you getting that from?
40% of Jews polled, not the case. And it is no wonder that you've got 40% of Jews polled saying that they will leave the country if Jeremy Corbyn is made Prime Minister. That is a damning indictment on Mr Corbyn and actually on what the Labour Party is doing about it.
Deafening silence from the presenter there. There is no credible poll that shows that 40% of the UK's Jews are thinking about leaving the country in the event Corbyn forms the next government. It's just not true. You get wild claims made by goons like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, an ultra-Zionist group in the UK. We've had a few run-ins, of course, but it's not backed up at all. All the polling in recent years shows that there's little or no anti-Semitism in UK society. Jews are thriving here. It's a great place for people to be Jewish, to observe their religion, their customs if they want to, and go about their business. There is no anti-Semitism in wider UK society. You'll get the odd idiot everywhere. I'm sure in North Manchester, every now and then, some chap will be going about his business and he'll have a skull cap on, and I'm sure every now and then some dope will shout something across the street at him, but that's no evidence of any wider problem. You know, sadly, we have to go about our lives and occasionally brush up against dickheads. Like those who would write things on Facebook like Jews should be exterminated. They're dickheads, these people. And they don't represent any existential threat to Jewish people. They're just dickheads. And we have to accept it, that we live amongst them. Now, when they say things like that, they should be investigated because that is a motion to violence. When you recommend that a group of people should be exterminated, somebody should knock on your door and find out who you are. I agree with that. But no evidence of any wider problem. She should challenge him about this. Jews want to leave if Corbyn gets in. This is bullshit. Rachel Riley might have said it. Z-list personality here in the UK. Alan Sugar might have said it. But the majority of Jewish people, they couldn't give a shit who the Prime Minister is. Just like me.
I mean, it is a travesty. You know, I was a
this is a journalist called Nikki Hodgson.
a lifelong Labour voter, and this has really kind of turned me. And I think it has been consistently Corbyn's dealing of it, and this just reluctance to accept that this is the truth for so many people.
Again, the presenter should jump in here and say, well, hang on a second. Corbyn has claimed that he is dealing with it, and they have expelled quite a few people in the last 12 months. That's what the presenter must do, because Labour has, even if some ultra-Zionists don't think it's enough, Labour has kicked people out of the party. So the presenter, Gillian Joseph, as this is a free-for-all against Jeremy Corbyn, she must say, hang on a second, they have suspended and they have expelled people. But she doesn't.
And there's so much evidence to suggest that there is a problem here. And I just think this is going to add fuel to the fire. This is not the article he wants before the election, but this could be a tipping point for lots of people.
Says the presenters. Yeah, no problem. And you know, I've noticed something creeping in as well. And you might have noticed it, maybe you haven't. Nikki Hodgson is a journalist. Darren Grimes is a Conservative, a Brexiteer, who works for the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Okay? And newspaper reviews used to be filled with the journalists themselves. A newspaper review ordinarily would be a journalist. And the journalist would comment on the piece that they'd written themselves in the papers that weekend and explain a bit more about the background and so on. But now paper reviews are a platform for basically... Yeah, paper reviews have now become a platform for propagandists and for campaigners like Darren Grimes to offer up opinions that go totally unchallenged by the presenters. Because it's a paper review, not an interview. That's how they will justify it. Strange, isn't it, the way the media evolves all the time? Newspaper reviews now, you've got a hard right guy called Darren Grimes, Brexiteer, famous for it. He gets to go on there and say whatever he wants about Jeremy Corbyn and gets totally unchallenged by the presenters. Anyway, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell, was on the Marr show on the other side. Marr, of course, did bring up the Times story and the anti-Semitism because it is relentless. What does John McDonnell say? I think we'll first of all hear the question from Andrew Marr.
Now, I have to turn to the other big story, as you know, in all the papers today, which is Labour and anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Can I ask you, first of all, why is it that so many people with such disgusting views felt at home in the Labour Party?
He should answer this, McDonnell, by saying, well, that's not true. We've got hundreds of thousands of members. And we've identified some people who make silly comments on social media, and we've maybe not distanced ourselves from them as quick as we could have, but it's not true that we have become a home for people with abhorrent views of Jews. It's not true. But he doesn't, McDonnell. He doesn't. Like Corbyn, he refuses to take this on head on and fight fire with fire.
It wasn't so many people. It was a small number, but I don't care
That's quite
how.
a lot.
No, I know. I don't care how many it was. One anti-Semite in our party is too many. And what we've done is we've started kicking them out in numbers. The reports this morning I saw in the papers cited a number of examples. Those people have been expelled or suspended. They've been done.
Right.
And I was on this.
You may not trust the newspapers, but do you trust the Labour Jewish movement?
Of course I do.
You trust the Labour Jewish movement because they have had a report which has terrible things
Yes,
in
but
it.
it's out of
Hitler
date.
was right, Zio scum,
we've
Jews
dealt
are
with-
subhuman.
Okay.
Now they say
Look.
that lots of demands they have made, that there's 136 cases that have not yet been dealt with. Is that true?
No, my understanding, no, it isn't, but from what I understand, my understanding is this. Of course, I respect them. The report that they produce, from my understanding of this, is well out of date. The individuals they've named, we've kicked out. That's the first thing. The numbers they're talking about, we've dealt with quite a significant amount.
So
Let me just finish
that was
this
a figure. I'm sorry, that was a figure in mid-October,
Yes.
immediately after the Labour Party. 136. How many now?
My understanding.
136 out of hundreds of thousands. And remember, not all of those 136 are people saying the Jews should be exterminated. When people say stuff like that, they should get slapped in the fucking face and held to account for it. Of course, who would say any different? But you're not dealing with that sort of thing. You're dealing with people saying Zio and stuff like that. You know, you're dealing with people that, like myself, utterly revile the state of Israel, as I do, and I've said this a million times. And you will have people like me who've become members of the Labour Party because they're idiots. Why be a member of a political party? You're never going to change anything through politics. But anyway, that's another argument for another day. There are lots of people in the Labour Party like me who do not believe that Israel has a right to exist. And that is considered by some to be an anti-Semitic statement. But it isn't. Israel has no right to exist. None. Its only legitimacy is based in religion. Golda Meir, Israel stands as a promise made by God himself. It would be absurd to question its legitimacy, said Meir once, and I probably have butchered that quote, but it's more or less what he said. Golda Meir. Right? So what in the name of Jesus is wrong with saying you don't believe Israel has the right to exist? But, these are the things you see. These are the things that are being, and of course I meant she, not he. What's wrong with me this morning? I was doing so well. Golda Meir, of course, she, not he. That's it. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, illegal under international law. Palestine didn't belong to the British and the French to carve up. It didn't. Do your fucking history. I know, I went the whole programme without swearing, but I get sick of this nonsense. Israel has no right to exist. But it does. There you are. The Balfour Declaration, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, completely illegal. But there you are, you're stuck with it now. So what are you going to do? Well, there are a million things you can do. But saying it has no right to exist is not anti-Semitic. So of the 136 comments, many of these comments will be comments along those lines. Along the lines of Israel is a Nazi state. It is a Nazi state. It is. It is. The Israeli government, with the one nation, with the one nation law, you know, that Israel is a nation for Jews. Right? Its treatment of the Palestinian people morning, noon and night. It is a Nazi state in how it goes about its business. So look, yes, you've heard these arguments before. There's no need to rehash them. Richie, I get you, 100%. But McDonnell is not saying any of this. You know, they're completely and utterly subjugated now. McDonnell and Corbyn, they won't take it on. You know what really pisses me off this morning? McDonnell should... Let's hear a little bit more of what McDonnell says, and then I'm going to say something. I'm going to put something to you that you just won't believe.
Is well below that, and there'll be a report in the normal way. I'm not on the NEC. There'll be a report in the normal way published in January, and there's a progress report. I came on this programme originally, can you remember? And I said I was angry because we weren't quick enough or ruthless enough.
And I also remember
the new procedures are dealing with that, and that report today doesn't take that into account.
You also said in that interview, I remember very clearly, that you would do anything that the Jewish community asked you to do. Now, what the Jewish...
What Jewish community, though? Which community is he talking about? Keep this in mind.
What the Jewish community wants you to do is to...
again, Andrew, I could punch Andrew Marr in the fucking face. He says here what the Jewish community wants you to do. Nobody speaks for Jews, and I'll explain why in a minute.
That the Jewish community asked you to do.
Yeah.
Now, what the Jewish community wants you to do is to resign your presidency of the Labour Representation Committee, which they say has said some very, very damaging and worrying things about this issue. Why won't you?
Well, I'm working with
Right, that's rubbish. We don't need to hear any more of that. The Jewish Voice for Labour is a group of Jewish people who vote Labour. You can find them on their website, jewishvoiceforlabour.org.uk. Jewish Voice for Labour. It's got a lot of members. And the Jewish Voice for Labour has written to the BBC to complain about the systematic bias in the BBC's reporting of anti-Semitism allegations against Jeremy Corbyn. It has written to complain about the BBC's continued pattern of accepting assertion as fact and not allowing contrary opinions to be heard. And this is what McDonnell and Corbyn failed to do repeatedly. And it's to challenge the presenters like Andrew Marr to say, which particular Jews are you talking about there, Andrew? Which ones? You mention, absolute dickheads like Stephen Pollard from the chip paper rag newspaper that's produced here, the Jewish Chronicle. It's worthless, right? You mention him sometimes. You sometimes mention the campaign against anti-Semitism, and you mention this Jewish Labour movement. Why wouldn't Corbyn or McDonnell say, what about the thousands of people in other groups, like the Jewish Voice for Labour, like the Jewish Socialist Movement? Lots of Jews! And they don't believe in any of this anti-Semitism nonsense. So why are you specifically targeting or listening to and promoting the voices of one group of people and repeatedly ignoring the voices of others who say, no, this anti-Semitism thing is a witch hunt, which Jewish Voice for Labour does? And ultimately, the thing is, and I've said this 1,000 times, and I've had arguments with Zionists, both Manchester-based Zionists and clowns like the campaign against anti-Semitism in other parts of the country. And I've repeatedly asked them to explain to me the difference between the right Jew and the wrong Jew. Because obviously the Jewish Voice for Labour and the Jewish Socialist Movement and the many thousands of Jewish people who support Jeremy Corbyn, they've been labelled the wrong Jews. They're the wrong Jews. You might be Jewish, but your opinion doesn't matter. You need to be... you need to toe the line. You need to say that you're terrified, that you're a victim, that you're horrified, and you're terrified of a Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister reality after next Thursday, December 12th. But they won't. They support Corbyn. They don't believe in these claims of anti-Semitism. So they are basically ignored, and they are told... silence is deafening. Silence is deafening because... when they write to the BBC, when they tweet out, as the Jewish Voice for Labour has done today, that they cannot believe that they are not given a chance to speak in favour of Jeremy Corbyn, they are just completely and utterly ignored. This is the media in 2019. There is no anti-Semitism. There is no existential threat to Jewish people in the UK or anywhere else in the world for that matter. None. And what you've got now is groups, and we've a very funny situation here in Manchester. There's a failed stand-up comedian called Marlon, an utterly wretched, miserable, cowardly fucking individual. Crap in every sense of the word. Useless stand-up comic has offered people the option of paying what they can to come and see him. His stand-up gigs are so badly attended. Failed actor. Failed agitator. Has tried to organise protests against people like David Icke to stop him speaking in places and has failed miserably. He's had 3 or 4 people turn up. But now he's making videos about the Rothschilds. Because, you see, there is status now to be achieved through victimhood. Appoint yourself as a perennial or as an eternal victim, as somebody who's in danger. That's the way you'll get famous. Can't get famous as a funny man because you're not funny. Can't get an acting gig because you can't act. You can't write for shit. So what will I do now? I'll proclaim myself to be an eternal victim and I'll start making videos about anti-Semitism. That's my pathway to fame. There's no anti-Semitism in this country. There is none. Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist at all. I've gone through this 1,000 times on programs. I've demonstrated that Jewish people, if you want to isolate Jews as a group, and there's no need to, because they're not a race, they're white people that believe in their own version of the fairy tale of the benevolent creator in the sky. That's all they are. They're white people. But if you want to isolate them as an individual group, they're fucking thriving. They're doing incredibly well. And good luck to them. No existential threat. Nobody's out to get them. Nobody hates them. It's a figment of the imagination of some very dark people. Is it true that they're coming after Corbyn because of his support for Palestine? I've no idea. I really don't. Maybe that is true. Maybe it is true that Corbyn has said things in the past about withdrawing support for Israel, recognising Palestine, but I have no idea. It's wretched to watch this every single week. But it's even more wretched, as I said to Tommy Sheridan on the radio show on Thursday, to see Corbyn and McDonnell sit there, twiddle their thumbs and not have the balls to take on people like Andrew Marr and Andrew Neil. And that's it for Sunday View. That's it for the programme. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:30, okay, on the newspaper show. Bye for now.